Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Steven Park. And today we bring you our watch along, not read along, of Crazy Rich Asians. And we're doing a comparison on the book versus the movie.
So, as a recap, we finished the book last week.
Mhm.
We were not so thrilled about the book, but I feel like we had a different feeling towards the movie.
Right. And I think we've always had this feeling towards the movie. Like, the reason we read the book was because we enjoyed the movie so much. Whereas otherwise, I would have normally watched the movie because I enjoyed the book so much.
Totally. Usually, I would say that I enjoyed the book more than the movie, but I think this time around, the movie totally takes the cake.
Right. Kind of like Walk to Remember. Movie is better than the book.
I don't know if I agree with that one, though.
The book of Walk to Remember is better than the movie?
I don't think it's better. I think they both brought two different aspects that I enjoyed.
Fair. There's another book turned movie slash more TV show that I'm really excited to watch. And I can't determine if I want to watch the TV show first or if I want to read the book first. So the show is called The Sympathizer. And when this comes out, there'll probably be like 4 or 5 episodes in. And it's a show with Sandra Oh. The cast looks like it's much more Vietnamese than the Americanized versions of different movies that are based on Asian characters.
Totally.
The book has been something I've been wanting to read for a long time. I think I'm going to wait to read the book. I also don't want to read the book without it being a part of the book club. But we also have a lot of books lined up for the book club.
Fair, but we can always put it to the top.
Yes. But also, I want to wait for the episodes to come out. I don't know. I don't mind waiting. I'm just very eager to watch it. I've seen the trailer for the TV show, and it also looks really good.
Totally.
But we're here to talk about Crazy Rich Asians. So, firstly, what did you think overall?
Of the movie?
Yeah.
I thought it was well put together and that the decisions that they made to change different events and change different characters was smart and that it came with the same spirit.
I agree, except I felt like it actually came with a different spirit, but in a better way. I think the way that they decided to direct the movie and really narrow down who was important and take away some of the side characters and side plots really started to focalize the point of what we were trying to get to.
For sure.
I also thought that decreasing the complexity of some of the characters really made it so that we can see the whole story rather than focus on these very complicated pathways of how these people might think. Where usually I do like characters that are very complex and kind of well built out. But in this case, it just didn't seem to be the flow that I was looking for.
For sure.
So let's talk about the movie. So one of the big changes was that the focal point, like we were saying, was Nick and Rachel, which it kind of was in the book, but there was also the story of Astrid. There was also the story of Eleanor finding out all the information. There was the story of Eddie. There was the story of Bernard.
There's the story of Picklin and Wei Moon.
Right, exactly. But in this movie, we get Nick and Rachel primarily.
Yes, exactly. They were the story that we followed all the way through.
Right.
And rather than focusing on the families, like you mentioned, it was focused on these two lovebirds.
Right. And when they did introduce characters, that's when we got some more of the descriptions of each character's kind of side plot. Like when they introduced Eddie, they started with that family photo shoot, and we got to see who Eddie was so succinctly that we didn't need a full chapter or several chapters to get who he is.
Right. We knew that he was this bossy husband and a bossy father to his family.
Right. We also found out that he's obnoxious pretty quickly.
Yes.
With Astrid's character, we see the shopping and we see her kind of epitomized in terms of the human that she is and how everyone wants to be Astrid.
Totally.
But her story does get sidelined a little bit.
It does get sidelined, but we do get snippets of it along the way, even though we don't get the full snooping and finding the pieces of the assumed affair.
Right. Did you like this version better, or did you like the book's version better?
I think it made sense to have her story told this way in the movie.
Right. I liked that the movie had done this with her character because once again, it took the spotlight off of her. It made Michael's character so much simpler as just being a person who had cheated.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the overall character of Michael in the book better, but it
Mm,
made sense for the movie that they're trying to shorten into a certain period of time.
for sure, to shorten it, but I also think that it made more sense for Michael to have cheated for real rather than make it up.
Right, which goes into the complexity versus the simplicity of the character.
Mm,
Is the complexity is Michael wanted to be this human that was whole, but didn't want to affect Astrid, so he kind of sacrificed himself or thought he was doing that and was trying to do the best thing by Astrid. So that was the complex nature rather than Michael cheated and he's a dirtbag.
for sure. Do you think that by simplifying the characters, it flattened them?
It did, but in a way that I didn't mind.
Mm,
Because it's really hard to understand the lives of eight, nine different people
for
and really
sure.
get to know who they are.
Absolutely.
But in that case, let's also talk about Peck Lin, because Peck Lin is a
Mm,
very singular minded character in the movie.
mm-hmm. She seemed very singular minded in the book, too.
Well, in the movie, she was Rachel's best friend and nothing but Rachel's best friend.
Mm,
In the book, she was Rachel's best friend, but also was so curious about who Nick was
mm,
that she was willing to go behind Rachel's back to find
to
out more
figure it out.
information about Nick.
Totally.
So I think she was always Rachel's friend. She took care of Rachel, did all that stuff, but there was a little bit of this backhanded, conniving nature behind Peck Lin
Mm,
that was maybe not meant to be hurtful, but definitely was more snooping.
I totally get that. Like, in general, with the book, a lot of the snooping nature was removed. Like, in essence, Eleanor's character.
Hmm.
Eleanor was less snoopy and was more elegant. And we kept saying this throughout the book. We
Hmm.
expected her to be more elegant, even though in the book she tended to be more critical and less motherly.
Right. And in this version of what we saw from Eleanor is a much more humanistic, I guess, side of her,
Mm-hmm.
which is hard to say because the book still describes her as a mother, but in a society that's very strict and has this rich overtone to it, which causes her to be so overly protective of Nick
Right.
and leads to the decisions that she makes.
For sure.
In the movie, we still see that Eleanor gave up Nick to Amma so
Mm-hmm.
that Nick could grow up with the money. So we still see the sacrifices that Eleanor makes. We do get more depth in the fact that we see more of the relationship between Amma and Eleanor and
Mm.
how Eleanor kind of gets pooped on by Amma a little bit.
Yeah.
So we get to see the humanistic nature of what Eleanor is going through. And then we also see the revival of her generosity in the fact that she gave the ring to Rachel in the end.
For sure, which was interesting that in the movie, I feel like there was more spotlight on how Rachel's situation with Nick was a similar situation that Eleanor faced with Philip, Amma's son.
Right, exactly.
And that made, I think, at least for me as a viewer, it made me feel like it should have made Eleanor be on Rachel's side, even though in essence she wasn't.
Right. And I think I also like that Eleanor came out as a redeeming character,
For sure.
that I can like her again at the end,
Mm-hmm.
rather than her being someone that you continue to dislike,
Mm-hmm.
which maybe that resolves in the second or third book, but
Right.
in that first read, it still is that Eleanor and now Amma are also just people that I would disagree with.
Right. Disagree with and dislike,
Right.
unfortunately.
Right. I also like that Rachel was able to stand up for herself,
Mm,
especially in the scene with Eleanor and the Mahjong scene.
yes.
So it showed that she had a very strong character and she was willing to fight for what she wanted, but wasn't willing to let go of who she believed that she was as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that characterization really helped to solidify who these characters were. And yeah, I liked Rachel so much more in the movie than I did in the book. And I don't know, Rachel had, to me, she had less faults in the movie than the book. She kind of came off as this really glowing character that came from a background where her mother had so little, so she had to work hard. And so there was none of the other parts of Rachel that were slightly racist against her own kind, like
Mm-hmm.
against Asian men. And I think the characters that were presented, once again, I feel like I've said this multiple times,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like I just like these characters so much more.
Absolutely. It felt like we could root for them even more. So, like, thinking about Nick on the other hand, Nick in the book felt like he was hiding things all the time, even
Right.
though it was him just being oblivious.
Right.
And I feel like the reason why we see Nick as hiding things in the book is because it took 2 years, and even after those 2 years, he didn't say anything about his family. As opposed to the movie, he would mention little bits and pieces, but would change the subject, like Rachel said.
Right.
And like Rachel even knew about Astrid in the movie.
But I think she also knew her in the book.
Hmm, true.
I think another part that I liked, which may have been more due to cost reasons, but
Mm.
they limited the amount of characters that were in the movie. So the character that soothed Rachel when she was on the island and crying was Astrid's cousin.
In the book.
Whereas, yeah, in the book, but in the movie, we get Astrid, who comes directly there, and they form more of a relationship. So we see Rachel form better bonds with certain people.
Mm-hmm.
We also see that the person that she first meets at that party is Mandy, I think, or one of the people that are
Yes,
trying to get at
Mandy.
Nick.
Yep, it was Mandy for sure.
Yeah, and so then we can also gain that hatred for Mandy in the same way that Rachel did because of the acts that Mandy goes through and kind of betraying and backstabbing her.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And that's interesting that Mandy would try to befriend her and then backstab her in the movie, as opposed to in the book. She was already telling Rachel all of the things that she and Nick had done.
I think you're thinking too nicely of Mandy. I think that was the trickery and the deception that Mandy brings along
Oh,
is I
yeah.
don't think she was ever trying to befriend Rachel.
Oh, I mean, like, I think that was more of a strategy rather than as a trying to be kind to her.
Right, right. I like this movie.
Yes.
We've now watched this movie so many times.
Mhm.
This may be a silly question, but would you recommend this movie?
I would highly recommend this movie. Not only is it a good movie, but it's such a pivotal point in Asian American history.
Hmm. In terms of the casting being mostly Asian and kind of trying to fit the roles of the Asian characters actually being from parts that are similar to where this film is filmed.
Exactly.
Right. I remember finishing this movie and really hoping that there would be more, which we
Mm.
really haven't got. I think it's kind of straight away. I would not only recommend this movie, but I would be very earnest in watching any of the future movies that come out from this franchise.
Mm,
I'm
yeah.
just curious how it plays out because there's so much missing from this movie that was in the book. So then, if we have Crazy Rich Asians Part 2, is that going to be part 2 of this book, or is it going to be the second book of the series that they're going to do? So I'm really curious where they would go from this.
Fair. I would definitely watch any sequel or trilogy of this movie.
Until it goes bad. I'm hoping that other people have seen this movie. I mean, it was really massive and it really opened the public to see what Singapore was like.
Hmm.
When I was in grad school, I had a friend that was from Singapore and Jakarta, and now she's living in Singapore again. I remember her telling me about this life and how there are these people that live there, what living there was like. And I was so glad that this movie came out to show the imagery that it did of what Singapore was
Hmm.
and is and how beautiful it really, really is. We have not traveled there yet, but it ranks very highly in places I want to go to,
Same.
except for in the summer because it looks really hot.
Yes.
And I want to eat food without sweating
For
and
sure.
eat hot soups without sweating more.
I think we're gonna sweat regardless, but maybe avoiding the extreme heat is a possibility?
Right,
Question mark?
right. For those of you who have watched it, if you have any opinions or if you have any thoughts on the movie, if you also geeked out on this movie as much as we did and want
Yeah.
to share your opinions, how can people do so?
You can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com or join the conversation on Instagram at Asian Book Club Pod.
Otherwise, you can reach our website at asianbookclubpod.com that has our bookstore where you can find books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat!
Bye.